My son and his beautiful wife were hosting my 72nd birthday party in their sprawling Hamptons estate. Champagne was flowing, jazz was playing, 200 guests were smiling at me. It should have been the happiest night of my life. Then my wife Bernice leaned in to hug me and whispered 5 words that made my blood freeze. "Take the keys. We are leaving. Act like nothing is wrong." I thought she was having a senior moment until she dragged me into the coat closet, locked the door, and shoved a glowing iPad screen in my face. "Look at this," she hissed. What I saw on that screen tore my heart out of my chest. It was a text message thread between my daughter-in-law and a man listed only as the doctor. The last message read, "The dosage in his wine is lethal. Wait 20 minutes after he collapses before calling 911. It will look like a natural heart attack." That was when I realized this was not a birthday party. It was a funeral reception. And the body in the casket was supposed to be mine. My name is Isaiah Thornton. Most people call me Ike. I am 72 years old, and for 40 years I built bridges and skyscrapers across this country. I know how to spot a weak foundation from a mile away. But I never saw the cracks in my own family until it was almost too late. Before I tell you how I survived the night my own son tried to murder me, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever trusted someone who turned out to be a snake. Your support helps me expose the truth. It started on a humid Saturday evening in late August. My son Dante and his wife Harper had insisted on throwing this gala. They said it was to honor my legacy, to celebrate the man who worked his way up from a military logistics officer to the owner of a construction empire. I wanted a small barbecue in the backyard with my old army buddies. Instead, I got a black tie event at their 3-story secluded mansion surrounded by dense forest. I stood in the center of the ballroom wearing a tuxedo that felt like a straitjacket. I looked around the room. I did not recognize a single soul. There were hedge fund managers, tech investors, real estate sharks. These were Harper's friends, not mine. They looked at me with that polite indifference people reserve for the elderly. They shook my hand and called me sir, but their eyes were scanning the room for someone more important. I looked for my son. Dante was standing near the bar, knocking back a scotch. He looked pale. Sweat was beading on his forehead even though the air conditioning was blasting. He kept checking his watch. My boy has always been soft. I tried to toughen him up. I tried to teach him the value of $1 and the weight of a handshake. But he preferred shortcuts. He preferred the easy life that my hard work provided. And standing there watching him tremble, I felt a knot of disappointment in my stomach that I could not untie. Then I saw her. Harper, my daughter-in-law. She was floating through the crowd in a red silk dress that looked like it cost more than my first house. She was the perfect hostess, charming, radiant. She touched arms and laughed at bad jokes. She was a predator in silk. I never liked her. From the moment Dante brought her home 5 years ago, I sensed something cold behind those blue eyes. But Dante loved her. Or maybe he was just possessed by her, so I kept my mouth shut. I paid for the wedding. I paid for the house. I tried to be the supportive father. Harper locked eyes with me from across the room. Her smile widened, but it did not reach her eyes. She grabbed 2 crystal glasses from a waiter and walked toward me. The crowd seemed to part for her. "Dad." She beamed her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "You look handsome. The birthday boy needs a special toast." She held out one of the glasses. The liquid inside was a deep, rich crimson. "This is a very rare vintage," she said, stepping closer. "Dante and I saved it just for tonight. It is from the year you started your company. I want you to drink it all, Dad, to your health, to your legacy." She pressed the glass into my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. I looked at the wine. It swirled in the glass, dark and heavy. I looked at Dante. He was staring at us from the bar, gripping his glass so hard I thought it would shatter. He looked like he was about to be sick. "Drink up, Isaiah," a man next to me said, clapping me on the shoulder. "It is a celebration." I raised the glass to my lips. The smell was earthy with a hint of something metallic. Almonds, maybe, or chemicals. I was about to take a sip when I felt a heavy impact on my side. Oh my goodness, I am so clumsy. It was Bernice, my wife of 50 years. She had stumbled into me hard. Her shoulder hit my arm and the crystal glass went flying. It hit the marble floor and shattered. The dark red wine splashed everywhere, staining the white hem of Harper's expensive dress. "Oh no!" Bernice cried out, her hand flying to her mouth. I tripped on my gown. "Ike! I am so sorry. Look at this mess." For a second, the mask slipped. I saw Harper's face twist into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her eyes bulged, her lips pulled back in a snarl. She looked at the spilled wine on the floor with a desperation that made no sense. It was just wine. Why did she look like she had just watched $1 million burn? Then just as quickly the mask was back. She forced a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "It is okay, Mom," she said, her voice tight. "Accidents happen. It was just a glass of wine. I will get another one." "No," Bernice said firmly, gripping my arm with a strength that surprised me. "Look at his tuxedo. Ike, you are soaked. And you are trembling. You look flushed. Come with me. We need to get you cleaned up before the speeches start." "But, Bernice," I started to say. I felt fine. I wasn't soaked. Just a few drops on my shoe. She dug her fingernails into my bicep, painfully deep. I said, "Come with me, Isaiah. Now." She did not wait for an answer. She dragged me through the crowd. I looked back and saw Harper signaling to a waiter, whispering something urgent. Dante had turned his back to us, facing the wall. Bernice marched me past the bathrooms, past the kitchen, and toward the master suite on the first floor. This was the guest wing where we were supposed to stay for the weekend. "Bernice, what has gotten into you?" I asked as we entered the room. "That was rude. Harper is going to be furious." Bernice did not answer. She slammed the heavy oak door shut and immediately threw the deadbolt. Then she dragged a heavy armchair in front of the door. "Bernice, stop it," I said, pulling my arm away. "You are acting crazy. What is going on?" She turned to me. Her eyes were wide with terror. She was breathing hard like she had just run a marathon. She did not speak. Instead, she reached into the deep pocket of her shawl and pulled out an iPad. It was Harper's. I recognized the rose gold case. "I found this on the kitchen counter," Bernice whispered. She left it unlocked while she was yelling at the catering staff. I saw a notification pop up. "Ike, you need to look at this." She shoved the tablet into my hands. Her hands were shaking so bad she almost dropped it. I looked down. It was an encrypted messaging app. The conversation was open. It was between Harper and a contact named Dr. Miracle. I scrolled up. My stomach dropped to the floor. 3 days ago. Harper wrote, "Is the mixture undetectable in an autopsy?" Dr. Miracle wrote, "Yes, provided he has a history of high blood pressure. The compound mimics cardiac arrest. It breaks down in the bloodstream within an hour." Harper wrote, "Perfect. He takes blood pressure meds. We will do it at the party. Too much excitement. Old heart gives out. It is a tragedy, but not a crime." I felt the room spin. I grabbed the edge of the dresser to steady myself. I scrolled down to today, 10 minutes ago. Harper wrote, "I have the glass ready. I am giving it to him now." Dr. Miracle wrote, "Make sure he drinks it all. Once he ingests it, you have about 5 minutes before he feels dizzy. Then he drops. Wait 20 minutes. Do not call 911 immediately. If they revive him, we are all dead." I looked up at Bernice, the woman who had patched up my wounds when I came back from overseas, the woman who had stood by me when we were broke. She was crying silent tears. "That wine," she whispered. "It wasn't wine, Ike. It was poison. She tried to kill you right in front of everyone." I looked at the door. I thought about Dante, my son, my own flesh and blood. He was standing there watching. He knew. "Dante," I muttered. "He wouldn't. He couldn't be part of this." Bernice took the iPad from me and tapped on another app. The banking app. "Look," she said. I looked. It was a joint account I didn't even know existed. It was in Dante and Harper's name. The balance was negative $2 million. And there was a pending transaction scheduled for Monday morning, a transfer request for $5 million. The source of funds was listed as Isaiah Thornton Life Insurance Payout. They had already spent the money. Bernice said, her voice trembling with anger. "They bet against your life, Ike. They need you dead tonight to cover their debts tomorrow." A cold calm washed over me. It was the same feeling I used to get in the military before a supply run in hostile territory. The fear vanished, replaced by a sharp clarity. "They are not just in debt," I said, my voice low and steady. "They are desperate. And desperate people make mistakes." "We have to call the police," Bernice said, reaching for the room phone. I stopped her hand. "No," I said. Look at the signal bars on the iPad. No service. And look at the room phone. I picked up the receiver. Dead silence. The line had been cut. They are jamming the signal, I said. This is not a party, Bernice. This is a trap. We are in the middle of the woods, miles from the nearest neighbor. The gates are electric. The staff are all hired by Harper. Someone tried the door handle. It jiggled violently. Mom, Dad, are you in there? It was Harper. Her voice was sweet. Too sweet. Like syrup over razor blades. Ike is not feeling well, Harper. Bernice shouted, her voice surprisingly steady. He needs to lie down. Oh no, Harper replied. Open the door, Bernice. I have some water for him. And Dr. Eris is here at the party. He can take a look at him. I looked at Bernice. We both knew who Dr. Eris probably was. The man from the text messages. We are fine, Harper, I yelled back. Just give us a minute. There was a pause. Then Harper's voice changed. The sweetness evaporated, leaving something hard and cold. Open the door, Ike. Don't make a scene. You don't want to ruin the party, do you? I looked around the room. We were on the first floor, but the windows were reinforced storm glass. There was only one way out, through the door or through the adjoining study. I grabbed Bernice's shoulders. Listen to me. We are not drinking anything. We are not eating anything. And we are not staying in this room. We have to run. Bernice whispered. I nodded. I checked my pockets. I had my pocket knife. A habit from the old days. It wasn't much against a house full of people who wanted me dead, but it was a start. I looked at the iPad one last time. I saw a file folder icon labeled The Exit Plan. I tapped it. It was a PDF. I opened it. It was a certificate of cremation, pre-filled. Dated for tomorrow. They weren't even going to bury me. They were going to burn the evidence. My heart hardened into stone. I looked at the door handle rattling again. Bernice, I said quietly, put your shoes back on. We are going to the garage. If we can get to the vintage car I restored for Dante, maybe we can ram the gate. But what if they stop us? She asked. I looked at the heavy brass lamp on the bedside table. I picked it up and weighed it in my hand. I am 72 years old, I said. I fought in a war. I built a company from dirt. I raised a son. I will be damned if I let a soccer mom and a gambling addict take me out with a glass of cheap poison. We are leaving Bernice. And if anyone gets in our way, I am going to teach them a lesson about old-school logistics. I moved the armchair away from the door. I gripped the brass lamp in one hand and my wife's hand in the other. Ready? I asked. She nodded, wiping her tears. Ready. I unlocked the door and swung it open. Harper was standing there holding a tray with a glass of water and 2 pills. Behind her stood 2 men I had never seen before. They were huge, wearing ill-fitting security uniforms. Time for your medicine, Dad. Harper smiled. I didn't smile back. I think I will skip the medication, Harper, I said, stepping into the hallway. The party is over. And that is when the real nightmare began. We moved through the service hallway like ghosts. My hand was clamped around Bernice's wrist and I could feel her pulse hammering against my skin. It was a fast, erratic rhythm that matched the dread sitting heavy in my own gut. We avoided the ballroom where the jazz band was playing a cover of Sinatra. The music sounded distorted now, like a funeral dirge played at double speed. We slipped out the side door that led to the detached garage. The night air hit us like a wet towel. It was heavy with humidity and the smell of impending rain. The Hamptons woods were pitch black beyond the manicured lawn. The only light came from the security floodlights that buzzed overhead, casting long, sharp shadows against the gravel driveway. My destination was my pride and joy, a 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS that I had restored with my own hands. I had given it to Dante as a gift 5 years ago, but I kept a spare set of keys. It was a beast of a machine. No computer chips, no GPS tracking, just raw American steel and horsepower. If we could get to that car, we could ram through the front gate before anyone knew we were gone. There it is, Bernice whispered, pointing to the dark shape in the third bay of the garage. We hurried across the gravel. The stones crunched under my dress shoes, sounding like gunshots in the silence. I fumbled in my pocket for the keys. My fingers were stiff. I told myself it was the arthritis, but I knew better. It was fear. Not for me, but for the woman standing next to me. I jammed the key into the door lock and twisted. The heavy door groaned open. "Get in," I hissed. "Get low." Bernice scrambled into the passenger seat. I slid behind the wheel. The smell of old leather and gasoline usually calmed me down. Tonight it just smelled like a trap. I pumped the gas pedal twice and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural growl that shook the concrete floor. For a split second, I felt a surge of hope. We were going to make it. I shifted into reverse and stomped on the gas. The car lurched backward a few inches and then stopped with a sickening metallic grind. The engine revved, but we weren't moving. "What is wrong?" Bernice cried out, grabbing the dashboard. I shifted into drive. The car didn't move. It just shuddered. I killed the engine and kicked the door open. I jumped out and ran to the back of the car. My heart sank into my shoes. A massive black SUV was parked perpendicular to the garage door, blocking us in completely. It was one of the guests' cars, or maybe one of the hired goons. There was no way out. But that wasn't the worst part. I looked down at the rear tires of the Chevelle. They were shredded. Not flat. Shredded. Someone had taken a hunting knife to the sidewalls. The rubber hung in ribbons. I ran to the front tires. Same thing. They knew I whispered. They knew we would try to run. "Ike, look." Bernice pointed toward the main gate at the end of the long driveway. It was a heavy wrought iron gate that I had paid $20,000 to install. It was electronic. I ran toward the keypad mounted on the stone pillar. I punched in the master code, 1972. The year I met Bernice. The keypad beeped 3 times. A red light flashed. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. They changed the code. I said, slamming my fist against the cold stone. "We are locked in." Suddenly the floodlights above the garage flickered and turned onto full brightness, blinding us. I threw my hand up to shield my eyes. "Going somewhere, Dad." The voice came from the shadows near the house. I squinted against the glare. Dante stepped into the light. My son. He was still holding his scotch glass, but it was empty now. His tuxedo shirt was unbuttoned at the collar and his tie was loose. He looked like a man who was about to vomit. He was sweating profusely even in the cool night air. His eyes were darting around nervously, looking at the trees, looking at the ground, looking anywhere but at me. "Dante," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Open the gate. Your mother is not feeling well. We need to go to the hospital." Dante shook his head. He took a step back as if he was afraid I would hit him. "You can't leave, Dad," he stammered. "The party, the guests. It would look bad. Everyone is waiting for the speech. Just come back inside. Please, don't make this difficult." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to cry when it thundered. I saw the teenager who crashed my truck and was too scared to tell me. And now I saw a 40-year-old man who was so deep in debt and fear that he was willing to sacrifice his own parents. "Open the gate, Dante," I barked, using my command voice, the voice that used to make 200 construction workers stand at attention. Dante flinched. He reached into his pocket. For a second, I thought he was reaching for the remote. But then a hand landed on his shoulder. A manicured hand with red fingernails. Harper stepped out from behind him. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was hard and angular in the harsh light. She looked like a marble statue of something evil. "Dad," she said, her voice smooth and dangerous. "You are confusing, Dante. You know how you get when you miss your medication. You become paranoid." "I am not paranoid, Harper," I said, stepping in front of Bernice to shield her. "I am seeing things very clearly for the first time in years. I see the slashed tires. I see the blocked driveway. And I see a daughter-in-law who is more interested in my life insurance than my life." Harper sighed, a theatrical, exaggerated sigh. She turned to Dante. "See, honey, I told you. The dementia is progressing faster than we thought. He is hallucinating. He thinks we are trying to hurt him." She snapped her fingers. From the darkness behind the garage, the 2 large men from the hallway emerged. They weren't wearing security uniforms anymore. They had taken off their blazers, exposing thick arms covered in tattoos. One of them was holding a heavy flashlight like a club. "Escort my in-laws back to the living room," Harper commanded, "and make sure they don't wander off again. For their own safety, of course." The men stepped forward. I looked at Dante. He was staring at his shoes, tears streaming down his face. "Dante," I said softly, "look at me, son. If you let them take me back into that house, I am not coming out alive. You know that. Dante looked up. His lips trembled. He opened his mouth to speak. Dante Harper cut in, her voice cracking like a whip. Remember the bank. Remember Monday morning. We don't have a choice. Dante closed his mouth. He looked at me one last time with dead eyes and then turned away. I felt Bernice gripping the back of my jacket. She was shaking violently. I looked at the two guards. I looked at the dark woods. I calculated the odds. I could maybe take one of them down, but not both, and not with Bernice to protect. Fighting here meant we would get beaten and dragged back anyway. Or worse, they would finish the job right here on the gravel and claim we were victims of a robbery gone wrong. I raised my hand slowly. Fine, I said. We will go back inside. Smart choice, Harper said. Her smile returned instantly terrifying in its artificiality. Now fix your tie, Dad. You have a speech to give. And try to smile. We are celebrating your life, remember, however long or short it may be. The guards flanked us, grabbing our arms with bruising force. They marched us back toward the house, back toward the music and the laughter and the poison. As we walked through the kitchen door, I looked back at the gate one last time. It wasn't just a gate anymore. It was the seal on a tomb. And as the heavy door clicked shut behind us, locking us in, I realized the terrifying truth. We were not guests at a party. We were prisoners in a slaughterhouse, and the butcher was wearing a red silk dress. The walk back to the living room was the longest walk of my life. My arm was being gripped by a man who smelled of stale tobacco and violence, but to the guests watching us, I probably just looked like a frail old man being helped by a solicitous staff member. The jazz band had switched to an upbeat number, something lively and brassy that clashed horribly with the cold dread settling in my stomach. I saw faces I vaguely recognized, business partners and neighbors, all smiling and sipping champagne, completely oblivious to the fact that they were witnessing a kidnapping in plain sight. Harper walked ahead of us, clapping her hands gently to get attention. Her voice was light and airy, carrying perfectly over the music. Everyone, please do not worry, she announced, flashing a sympathetic smile that made my skin crawl. Dad is just having a little spell. Too much excitement for one night. We are going to get him settled in the guest suite for a nap. Please enjoy the hors d'oeuvres. She played the role of the concerned daughter-in-law so perfectly that I almost wanted to applaud her. A few guests nodded sympathetically. Poor old Ike, they were probably thinking. He is finally losing it. That was her game. Discredit the victim before he can even scream. If I shouted for help now, I would just look like the confused, senile old man she claimed I was. So I kept my mouth shut. I let them march me and Bernice down the hallway, past the family photos that now looked like lies hanging on the wall, and into the guest suite. The door clicked shut behind us. Then came the sound that is the same in every language. The heavy metallic thud of a deadbolt sliding home. We were alone. Bernice immediately rushed to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtains. Outside stood another man in a dark suit, his back to us, arms crossed, watching the garden. We are trapped. Ike, she whispered, her voice trembling. They really did it. They locked us in. I sat down heavily on the edge of the king-sized bed. My knees were throbbing. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving behind a deep, aching weariness. I looked at the ornate room. It was decorated in shades of cream and gold, expensive and tasteful. It was a beautiful cage. I rubbed my face with my calloused hands, trying to erase the image of Dante's face in the driveway. The way he couldn't look me in the eye, the shame, and the fear. Why Ike Bernice asked, sitting next to me and taking my hand. Why would Dante do this? He is our son. We gave him everything. I closed my eyes and suddenly I was back in my office 4 weeks ago. The memory was so sharp it cut. Dante had come to see me. He wasn't the polished host in a tuxedo then. He was a mess. His eyes were bloodshot and he reeked of nervous sweat. Dad, I need a loan, he had said. $2 million. I had laughed. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He had leveraged his own construction firm, the one I helped him start, to buy into a cryptocurrency scheme that had crashed overnight. And worse, he had borrowed money from people who didn't use lawyers to collect debts. I told him no. I told him that bailing him out would only cripple him further. I told him to sell the house, sell the cars, and face his mistakes like a man. I thought I was teaching him a lesson about responsibility. I thought I was being a good father. I looked at Bernice now, and the realization hit me like a sledgehammer. It is the debt, I said, my voice raspy. The $2 million. Plus the interest. Those men outside are not just security guards, Bernice. They are the loan sharks. Harper didn't just hire them. She made a deal with them. My life insurance payout is $5 million. That covers Dante's debt and leaves Harper with $3 million to start over. Bernice covered her mouth, stifling a sob. So that is what we are worth to them? A balance sheet correction. She stood up, wiping her eyes. She wasn't a woman who stayed down for long. She was a nurse. She was used to crisis. I am going to call the police, she said, marching toward the bedside phone. I don't care if the line is cut. I am going to try. She picked up the receiver and listened. Nothing. She slammed it down and pulled out her cell phone. She walked around the room, holding it up in the air, moving from corner to corner. No service, she muttered. It just says searching. How is that possible, Ike? We are in the house. We always have signal here. I looked at the small blinking red light on the smoke detector on the ceiling. It was blinking too fast. It is a jammer, I said. A signal blocker. It is illegal military-grade tech. Harper must have paid a fortune for it. It creates a bubble of white noise around the house. No calls in, no calls out, no internet. Bernice looked defeated. She went into the bathroom to splash water on her face. A moment later, she came back looking even more pale. There is no hot water, she said, and the towels are gone. I frowned. Why would they cut the hot water? Because they want us uncomfortable, I said. It is psychological warfare. Or maybe they just turned off the boiler to this wing to save money since they plan on us being dead by morning anyway. Dead by morning. The words hung in the air between us. I stood up, ignoring the pain in my joints. I walked over to the heating vent on the wall near the floor. It was a large decorative grate painted to match the baseboards. I knelt down and peered through the slats. It was dark, but I could feel a faint draft. I spent 40 years building houses, I said, running my fingers along the metal frame. I know how this place is wired. I know how it breathes. Bernice knelt beside me. What are you thinking, Ike? This vent, I said, tapping the metal. It is an old-fashioned wide duct system. I insisted on it when Dante built the place because it is more efficient for central air. This main trunk line goes straight up through the wall and branches off. One branch goes to the master bedroom upstairs, the other branch goes to the study. The study, Bernice repeated. Dante's office. Exactly, I said. Dante is a gamer. He plays those high-speed online games. He complained about the Wi-Fi lag, so he had a hardline fiber optic cable installed directly into the study wall. It is a shielded line. Even a jammer might not block a hardwired connection if we can get to his computer. But the study is on the other side of the house, Bernice said, and the door is locked. I pulled my pocket knife out of my tuxedo pants. It was a small folding knife with a bone handle, a retirement gift from my foreman. It wasn't a weapon of war, but it was a tool. And right now, a tool was worth more than a gun. I jammed the blade into the screw head, holding the vent cover. It was painted over tight, but I twisted with all the strength I had left. Paint chipped. The screw turned. We are not going through the door, I said, gritting my teeth as the screw gave way. We are going through the walls. I got the first screw out, then the second. The metal grate clattered to the floor. The hole was dark and dusty. It was small, a tight squeeze for a big man like me, even having lost weight recently. Bernice looked at the hole, then at me. Ike, you can't be serious. You have a bad back. You are 72. You will get stuck. I looked at my wife. I looked at the terror in her eyes that she was trying so hard to hide. I am not dying in this bedroom, Bernice, I said, taking off my tuxedo jacket and rolling up my sleeves. And I am certainly not letting that woman win. I need you to help me, I said. I need you to push my feet. And once I am in, I need you to put the grate back on so the guards don't see it if they come in. But what about me? She asked, her voice rising in panic. You are leaving me here alone. I grabbed her face in my hands, only for 10 minutes. I am going to crawl to the study. I am going to send an email to the only person I trust. Then I am coming back for you. I promise. She nodded, tears spilling over. Go, before they come back. I lay on my stomach and shimmied into the dark metal throat of the house. The dust was thick, choking me immediately. I held my breath. The metal was cold against my chest. I used my elbows to pull myself forward inch by painful inch. My shoulders screamed in protest. The space was claustrophobic, pressing down on me like a coffin. I could hear the muffled sounds of the party through the ductwork. Laughter, glasses clinking, the bass of the music. It was surreal. Just a few feet away, people were celebrating my life while I was crawling through dirt to save it. I reached a junction. Left went up to the master bedroom. Right went to the study. I turned right. The incline was steep. I dug my toes into the seams of the metal and pushed. I thought about Dante. I thought about the little boy I taught to ride a bike. How did we get here? How did I miss the signs? Was I too hard on him? Or was I too soft? The questions burned in my mind, distracting me from the physical pain. Suddenly I heard voices. They were coming through the vent ahead of me, loud and clear. The acoustics of the metal ducts acted like a microphone. I froze. I was directly under the vent in the study. I held my breath, listening. It was Dante, and he wasn't alone. "You can't do this." Harper Dante's voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysteria. "He is my father. The poison. You said it would be painless. You said he would just go to sleep." I heard the sound of liquid being poured, ice clinking against glass. "Grow up." Dante Harper's voice was calm, terrifyingly casual. Painless for him, profitable for us. "Do you want to lose the house? Do you want to go to jail for fraud? Because that is what happens if we don't get that insurance money by Monday." I heard a heavy sigh. "But the body," Dante whispered. "The autopsy." "I told you," Harper snapped. "Dr. Aris is the coroner for this county. Why do you think we invited him? He signs the death certificate. Cause of death, heart failure. Cremation scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. By the time anyone asks questions, your father will be nothing but ash in a jar." My blood ran cold. The plan was even more detailed than I thought. They had the coroner in their pocket. I had to get to that computer. I had to alert someone outside this corrupt circle. I inched forward silently until I was directly beneath the study vent. I could see beams of light slicing through the darkness. I reached up to push the grate. It was loose. Thank God. But then I heard the doorknob turn. Someone else was entering the room. "Well, well, well," a deep voice boomed. It wasn't the guards. It sounded like Dr. Aris. "Is the patient ready for his final checkup?" I froze my hand, hovering inches from the grate. If I moved, they would see me. If I made a sound, it was over. I lay there in the darkness, listening to them plan my murder, praying that my old joints wouldn't crack and give me away. The darkness inside the ventilation shaft was absolute. It felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on my spine. I am 72 years old. My knees are titanium. My lower back has been a mess since I carried supply crates in the 79. And now I was Army crawling through a galvanized steel coffin that I had installed 20 years ago. Every inch was a battle. The screw heads on the floor of the duct dug into my elbows. The dust was thick and tasted like old insulation and neglect. It coated my throat, making me want to cough, but I swallowed the urge. Coughing meant death. I dragged my body forward, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My tuxedo was ruined. My expensive Italian shoes were scraping against the metal, but I didn't care about the clothes. I cared about the voices drifting toward me through the echo chamber of the ductwork. I reached the junction box directly above Dante's study. Light sliced through the slats of the vent cover below, cutting through the swirling dust motes. I stopped moving. I lay perfectly still, ignoring the screaming pain in my shoulders, and pressed my ear against the cold metal. The voices were clear now, terrifyingly clear. "You said he would just sleep," Dante was saying. His voice was high and thin, cracking with panic. "You told me the pills were just a heavy sedative. You said we would put him in the car, drive him to the hospital, and claim he had a stroke so we could get power of attorney. You never said anything about stopping his heart." I squeezed my eyes shut. My son, my boy. He thought he was agreeing to incapacitate me, not kill me. It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. He was weak. He was a coward. But he wasn't a murderer, not yet. "Oh, grow up," Dante Harper's voice sliced through his panic like a scalpel. She sounded bored, annoyed, like she was explaining simple math to a slow child. "Power of attorney takes months. The courts get involved. Your father has lawyers who would fight us every step of the way. We don't have months, Dante. We have until Monday morning." I heard the sound of pacing, leather shoes on hardwood floors. "If that wire transfer doesn't clear by 9 a.m., the loan sharks are going to break your legs," Harper continued. "And after they break your legs, they are going to come for me. Do you think I am going to let some Russian thugs ruin my face because you are too sentimental to do what needs to be done?" "But he is my father," Dante sobbed. I heard the sound of glass shattering. He must have thrown his drink against the wall. "I can't do it, Harper. I can't watch him die." We have to call 911. Maybe it is not too late." There was a silence. A long, heavy silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Then Harper spoke again. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried more menace than a scream. "You are not calling anyone. If he wakes up, we go to prison. Do you understand that? Attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy. We lose the house, we lose the cars, we lose everything. The only way out is through the funeral home. Now stop crying and go downstairs. Make sure none of the guests come up here. I need to print the final documents." I heard a door slam. Dante was gone. I lay there in the darkness, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Harper was still in the room below me. I could hear her typing on a keyboard. I had to get down there. I had to see what she was printing. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The typing stopped. Then I heard the heavy oak door open and close again. The click of heels on the hallway floor fading away. She was gone. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't afford to. I couldn't. I jammed my fingers into the slats of the vent cover. It wasn't screwed in. I had designed these vents with magnetic latches for easy cleaning. Thank God for my obsession with maintenance. I pushed. The grate popped up. I slid it aside. I looked down. It was about an 8-foot drop to the top of a bookshelf and then another few feet to the floor. I swung my legs through the hole. I hung by my fingertips for a second, my old muscles screaming in protest, and then I let go. I landed on the bookshelf with a thud that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I froze, waiting for an alarm, waiting for footsteps. Silence. I scrambled down to the floor. The study was exactly as I remembered it. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, the smell of expensive cigars and old paper. But on the massive mahogany desk in the center of the room sat a pile of documents that didn't belong. I rushed to the desk. My hands were shaking as I picked up the top folder. It was labeled simply Project Omega. I opened it. The first page was a life insurance policy. My policy, the one I had taken out 10 years ago to protect Bernice. But the beneficiary designation had been changed. Bernice's name was crossed out. In its place, typed in crisp black letters, was the Dante and Harper Thornton Revocable Trust. I flipped the page. It was a transfer of deed for my construction company. It transferred 100% of my shares to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, and at the bottom of the page was my signature. I stared at it. It was perfect. The loop on the I, the sharp slant of the T, it was my signature, but I had never signed this. I looked at the desk. Next to the computer was a notepad. On it were dozens of practice attempts. Someone had spent hours tracing my handwriting, perfecting the forgery. It wasn't Dante. His handwriting was messy like a doctor's. This was precise, calculated. This was Harper. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a crime of passion or desperation. This was a hostile takeover. She had been planning this for months, maybe years. She had studied me. She had studied my business. She was going to erase me from the earth and steal everything I had built for my family. I grabbed the folder. I needed to take this. This was the evidence. I reached for the computer mouse to wake the screen. I needed to send an email to my lawyer. I needed to get this outside the jammer's range. But just as my hand touched the mouse, I heard it. The click of the doorknob. Someone was coming back. I looked up at the vent. It was 10 feet high. Impossible to reach. I looked at the window, barred with decorative ironwork. The footsteps were right outside the door. I looked around frantically. The desk, too open. The curtains, too sheer. The closet. It was a walk-in cedar closet where Dante kept his winter coats. It was 10 feet away. I lunged for it. My bad knee buckled, but I forced myself forward. I slipped inside just as the study door swung open. I pulled the closet door shut, leaving a tiny crack just wide enough to see through. I held my breath. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle the sound of my own wheezing lungs. Harper walked into the room. She wasn't alone. She was talking on a burner phone. "Yes, Dr. Aris," she said, pacing in front of the desk. "The old man is secured. The wife is with him. No, she didn't drink the wine, but we will handle her. A tragic fall down the stairs in her grief. Yes, 2 bodies are harder to explain, but we have no choice now." My blood turned to ice. They weren't just going to kill me. They were going to kill Bernice, too. Harper stopped at the desk. She frowned. She reached out and touched the folder I had just been holding. I had left it slightly askew. She paused. She looked around the room. Her eyes scanned the bookshelves, the window, then her gaze stopped. She was looking right at the closet door. I stopped breathing. I stopped thinking. I just gripped the handle of my pocket knife in my sweaty palm and waited for the devil to open the door. I barely made it back to the bedroom before the lock turned. I dropped from the vent, my joints screaming in protest, and Bernice shoved the grate back into place just as the heavy oak door swung open. I collapsed onto the bed, trying to steady my breathing, trying to look like a man waking from a nap and not a man who had just crawled through the guts of his own house to discover his own murder plot. Harper stood in the doorway. She had changed her dress. The wine-stained silk was gone, replaced by a sharp black evening gown that made her look like the widow she hoped to be by morning. "Dinner is served," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the fake warmth she had used earlier. "We are not hungry," Bernice said, standing between me and Harper. "We just want to go home." "Sit down," Mom Harper snapped. "Mom Harper." She didn't shout, but the command had the force of a whip crack. "You will come downstairs. You will eat dinner. And you will smile. We have sent the other guests home. It is just family now, an intimate celebration." She turned to the 2 guards standing behind her. "Escort them." We were marched down the grand staircase like prisoners of war. The house was eerily silent. The jazz band was gone. The catering staff had vanished. The only sound was the clicking of Harper's heels on the marble floor and the heavy breathing of the guards behind us. The dining room was set for 4, crystal glasses, silverware that gleamed under the chandelier. It looked like a page from a lifestyle magazine, but it felt like an execution chamber. Dante was already seated. He was staring into an empty wine glass. He looked worse than before. His skin was gray, and his hands were trembling so badly he had to clasp them together on the table. He didn't look up when we entered. He couldn't. "Sit," Harper commanded, pointing to the head of the table. I sat. Bernice sat to my right. Harper took the seat opposite me. Dante was on my left, close enough to touch, but he felt miles away. The guards took up positions by the door, arms crossed. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Harper said, unfolding her napkin. "We prepared a special soup for you, Dad. Wild mushroom bisque. It is your favorite, isn't it?" She didn't wait for an answer. She stood up and walked to the sideboard where a silver tureen was steaming. She didn't let the staff serve. She did it herself. She ladled the thick gray liquid into a bowl. I watched her hand. It was steady, surgical. She placed the bowl in front of me. "Eat up," she said. "It will make you feel better." The smell hit me instantly. Earthy mushrooms, heavy cream, and something else. Something faint and bitter underneath the garlic and herbs. It smelled like the chemical death I had read about in the doctor's text messages. I looked at the soup. Then I looked at Bernice. She was staring at the bowl, her eyes wide with terror. She gave the slightest shake of her head, a microscopic movement that only a husband of 50 years would notice. "Do not eat." I looked at Dante. He was sweating. He was watching the bowl, too. He knew. I picked up my spoon. My hand was shaking. This time I didn't have to pretend. The rage vibrating in my bones made the silver spoon rattle against the china. "I can't," I said, my voice cracking. "I am not feeling well, Harper. My stomach." Harper's eyes narrowed. "Eat the soup, Isaiah. It cost a fortune. You don't want to be rude, do you?" I lifted the spoon. I brought it halfway to my mouth. I saw Harper lean forward, anticipation tightening her jaw. She was hungry for it. She was hungry to watch the life drain out of me. I let the tremor in my hand take over. I amplified it. I let my arm spasm violently. The spoon flew from my hand. I jerked forward and my hand swept the bowl off the table. The hot, thick liquid went flying. It arced across the table and splashed directly onto Harper's chest and lap. She screamed. It was a high, piercing sound of shock and pain. She jumped up, knocking her chair over. "You clumsy old fool," she shrieked, wiping frantically at the hot soup staining her black dress. "Look what you did." I sat there, my hands still trembling, feigning shock. "Oh, I am so sorry. My hands. I can't control them." Harper didn't hear me. The mask was completely gone now. The sophisticated hostess had vanished, replaced by a snarling animal. Her face was twisted into a rictus of pure hatred. "Stop acting!" Harper yelled, lunging toward me. "You are doing this on purpose, you useless, senile old baggage. Eat it. Pick up the bowl and eat it." She grabbed my shoulder, her nails digging into my jacket. "Eat the damn soup, you old bastard. Die already. Just die." The room went dead silent. The guards shifted uneasily. Even evil men get uncomfortable when the veil is ripped away so violently. Dante looked up, his mouth open in shock. "Harper," he whispered. "Shut up, Dante." Harper spun on him, her eyes wild. "Shut your mouth. Make him eat, or I will pour it down his throat myself." I looked at my son. He was shrinking into his chair, terrified of his wife, terrified of his father, terrified of the monster he had married. Something inside me snapped. The soldier in me woke up. The father in me broke. I stood up. I didn't stand up like an old man. I stood up like a tank commander. I turned to Dante. I didn't look at Harper. I ignored her screaming. I looked solely at my son. I pulled back my hand and I slapped him. It wasn't a love tap. It was a hard, open-handed strike that connected with his cheekbone with a sound like a pistol crack. Dante's head snapped back. He nearly fell out of his chair. He looked at me, holding his cheek, his eyes filling with tears of shock. "Dad," he whimpered. "You let her talk to me like that?" I roared, my voice booming off the paneled walls. I pointed a finger at his face, a finger that had built bridges and commanded battalions. "I changed your diapers, Dante. I paid for your education. I built a legacy for you, and you sit there like a coward and let this woman scream in my face. You let her wish death on me at my own dinner table." I leaned in close, my face inches from his. "Where is your honor, boy? Where is your spine? Did I raise a man or did I raise a pet?" Dante stared at me. For the first time all night, he really saw me. He didn't see the frail victim. He saw his father, and he saw the disappointment burning in my eyes, hot enough to melt steel. Harper stepped back, stunned by the sudden explosion of power from the man she thought was helpless. "Sit down, old man," she hissed, but her voice wavered. "Guards, restrain him." The two men stepped forward, reaching for their batons. I turned to face them, my hands balled into fists, ready for one last fight. But before they could touch me, Dante stood up. "Wait," Dante said. His voice was shaking, but he was standing. "Don't touch him." Harper turned to her husband, her eyes flashing dangerously. "Sit down, Dante. Let the adults handle this." "No," Dante said louder this time. He looked at the soup on the floor. He looked at the fear in his mother's eyes. And he looked at the red mark on his own face. Something shifted in him. A tiny spark in the ashes. "We need to talk, Harper," Dante said. "Alone." "We are way past talking, honey," Harper sneered, reaching into her purse. She wasn't reaching for a phone. The air in the room tightened until it felt like a wire about to snap. I watched her hand disappear into the leather bag, and I knew that the time for slaps and speeches was over. The time for survival had just begun. Harper stormed out of the dining room, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows, leaving a trail of angry silence in her wake. She needed to change her dress, but I knew she was also going to retrieve something far more dangerous than fresh clothes. She was going to get the final paperwork. Or maybe a gun. The heavy oak door slammed shut upstairs, echoing through the hollow house. I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. It was ticking loudly, a rhythmic countdown to our execution. We had 5 minutes, maybe less. The two guards by the door shifted their weight. They looked bored. They were paid muscle, not family. As long as we stayed in our chairs, they didn't care what we said. I turned my entire body toward Dante. He was still staring at the puddle of mushroom bisque on the floor, his face buried in his hands. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the belt. But I wasn't going to hit him again. Violence builds walls, but the truth blows them up. "Dante, look at me," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the voice I used when a skyscraper foundation was off by an inch. It was the voice of absolute, unshakable authority. Dante kept his head down. "I can't, Dad. I can't." "Look at me, son," I repeated, sharper this time. He slowly lifted his head. His left cheek was bright red from my slap. His eyes were swimming in tears and terror. I didn't offer him comfort. I didn't reach out to hold his hand. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the expensive tablecloth. "I know about the cryptocurrency, Dante," I said, holding his gaze. "I know about the $2 million you lost. I know about the loan sharks who are threatening to break your legs. And I know about the $5 million life insurance policy that matures on Monday." Dante's eyes widened. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the words died in his throat. He saw the knowledge in my eyes. "You think this is a way out?" I continued, my voice cold and hard. "You think killing your father is just a financial transaction? A line item on a spreadsheet to balance your books? Is that what I taught you? Is that the man I raised? Dante shook his head violently. No, Dad, no. It is not like that. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I cut him off. You are weak, and you married a shark who smelled blood in the water. It is not about the money. Dante shouted, his voice cracking. He slammed his fist on the table, causing the silverware to jump. It is about mercy, Dad. It is about ending the pain. I frowned. The room went deadly quiet. Even the guards looked up. Mercy, I repeated slowly, testing the word. What pain are you talking about, Dante? Dante looked confused. He looked from me to Bernice and back to me. The cancer, he whispered. I felt Bernice stiffen beside me. What cancer? She asked, her voice barely a breath. Dante looked at us like we were the crazy ones. The pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Harper showed me the medical reports from Dr. Aris. She said you were in agony, Dad. She said you were hiding it from Mom to protect her. She said the doctors gave you 2 weeks of hell before the end. He was crying openly now, tears dripping onto his tuxedo. She said this was a kindness, he sobbed. She said the pills and the wine were just a heavy sleeping agent that would stop your heart peacefully. She said you wanted this. She said you asked for this. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The air left my lungs. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. Harper hadn't just convinced Dante to kill me for money. She had convinced him that murdering his father was an act of love. She had turned his weakness into a weapon. I looked at my wife. Bernice was trembling with rage. Dante, look at your father, Bernice said, her voice shaking. Look at him. Does he look like he is dying? Dante blinked through his tears, looking at me. He just had his annual physical last week, Bernice continued. His blood pressure is 120/80. His heart is strong as an ox. He walked 5 miles yesterday morning. There is no cancer, Dante. There never was. Dante shook his head. But the papers, the biopsy results, Harper showed me. They had the hospital seal. Harper has a printer and no conscience, I said. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my chest out. I didn't look like a dying man. I looked like a man ready to tear a house down with his bare hands. Dante, I said, your wife is lying to you. She is not trying to save me from pain. She is trying to secure a payout. And she is using you as the fall guy. Bernice stood up too. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tissue, but her hand paused. She looked at Dante with a sudden sharp realization. It wasn't the first time she whispered. We both looked at her. Dante, Bernice said, do you remember last month when Harper's first husband died? The accident. Dante nodded slowly. He fell asleep at the wheel. He drove off the bridge. Bernice leaned across the table, her eyes locked on her son. 2 weeks before that accident, I was helping Harper look for her lipstick in her purse, Bernice said. I found a bottle of pills, strong sedatives, the kind they use for horses. I asked her about them and she snatched the bag away. She said they were for the dog. But Harper doesn't have a dog, Dante. The color drained from Dante's face, leaving him ghostly white. She drugged him, Bernice said firmly. Just like she tried to drug your father tonight. That wasn't an accident, Dante. That was a dry run. And tonight is the main event. Dante looked like he was going to be sick. The reality of his world was crumbling around him. The woman he loved wasn't a savior. She was a black widow. But he stammered. But she loves me. We are going to have a baby. I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. There is no baby, Dante, I said. Just like there is no cancer. Just like there is no mercy. There is only the money. And once I am dead, and she has the check, who do you think is next on her list? I pointed at the empty chair where Harper had been sitting. She has the documents ready, I said. I saw them in the study. A trust fund controlled solely by her. You are not a partner in this, Dante. You are a loose end. Dante stared at the empty chair. His hands were shaking so hard the table vibrated. Suddenly we heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. She is coming back, Bernice whispered, grabbing my arm. I looked at Dante. He was broken, but I needed to know if he was broken enough to be fixed, or if he was just rubble. You have a choice, son, I said, lowering my voice. You can sit there and be a victim, or you can stand up and be a Thornton. But you need to decide right now, because when that door opens, the talking is over. Dante looked up at me. His eyes were full of fear, but for the first time tonight, the fog of deception was clearing. She lied to me, he whispered. Yes, I said. The doorknob turned. Dante wiped his face with his sleeve. He took a deep, shaky breath. I looked at the guards. They were tensing up, ready for orders. I squeezed Bernice's hand. Whatever happens, I whispered to her, stay behind me. The door swung open. Harper walked in. She was wearing a sleek pantsuit now and combat boots. She wasn't dressed for a party anymore. She was dressed for work. And in her hand, she held a syringe. Everyone calm down, she said, smiling a smile that didn't reach her dead cold eyes. Dr. Aris says the pills might take too long. We are going to speed things up. She looked at Dante. Hold him down, honey, she said. Dante looked at the syringe. He looked at Harper. Then he looked at me. And in that split second of silence, the war for my son's soul was fought and won. The silence that followed my question to Dante was heavy enough to crush bones. For a heartbeat, I thought I had reached him. I saw the conflict warring behind his eyes, the terrified little boy fighting against the weak man he had become. He looked at the syringe in Harper's hand, and then he looked at me, and for a second I saw him start to stand up, not as a subordinate, but as a son defending his father. But Harper saw it too. She was a predator, and predators know exactly when they are losing control of the pack. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She simply dropped the mask completely. The loving wife, the concerned hostess, the grieving daughter-in-law, those roles vanished instantly. What was left was something cold and efficient and terrifyingly hollow. You are pathetic, Dante, she said. Her voice was devoid of emotion, just a flat statement of fact. She didn't even look at him. She looked past him toward the double doors of the dining room. Plan B, she shouted. The doors swung open immediately. The two men who had been guarding the hallway stepped inside. Up close, they looked even bigger. They didn't move like security guards trained to de-escalate situations. They moved like street brawlers hired to finish them. Their eyes were empty. They weren't here to escort us out. They were here to dispose of us. Grab them, Harper ordered, pointing a manicured finger at me and Bernice. Take them to the wine cellar, tie them up, and make sure the basement door is unlocked. She turned to Dr. Aris, who was standing in the shadows wiping his glasses. When the coroner arrives, Harper continued checking her watch. We will say they got confused in the dark. They opened the wrong door thinking it was a bathroom and fell down the steep stone stairs. At their age, a fall like that is fatal, especially with neck trauma. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a plan, it was a script, and she was directing our death scene right in front of us. Bernice let out a gasp of pure horror, gripping my arm so tight her nails cut through my jacket. One of the guards, a giant with a scar running through his eyebrow, stepped toward Bernice. He reached out a hand the size of a shovel to grab her arm. Come on, Grandma, he grunted. Let's go for a walk. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't the fear of death. It was the sight of this thug putting his filthy hands on my wife. I spent 40 years in construction sites and 3 years in a war zone. I knew violence. I knew how ugly it could get. And I knew that if they got us into that cellar, we were never coming out. I am 72 years old. My knees ache when it rains. My back is stiff in the mornings. But in that moment, I didn't feel any of that. I felt a surge of adrenaline so pure it felt like electricity. I carry a cane. Most people think it is just for support, a sign of my frailty. But I made this cane myself. It is solid ebony wood, dense and heavy as iron. And the handle is a solid brass eagle head weighing nearly 2 pounds. It wasn't just a walking stick, it was a bludgeon. As the guard reached for Bernice, I shifted my weight. I didn't step back. I stepped in. I gripped the shaft of the cane with both hands and swung it like a baseball bat. I didn't aim for his head. That is what amateurs do. I aimed for the one place a big man can't build muscle. The brass head of the cane connected with the guard's shin bone with a sickening crack that echoed off the high ceiling. The sound was wet and crunchy. The guard didn't scream immediately. He just froze, his eyes widening in shock. Then his leg buckled. He collapsed sideways, howling in agony, clutching his shattered shin. "Run, Bernice!" I roared, shoving her toward the door. The second guard lunged at me. He was faster than the first. He threw a heavy punch that caught me in the shoulder. Pain exploded down my arm, spinning me around. I stumbled, knocking into the china cabinet. Plates and crystal glasses crashed to the floor around me, shattering into thousands of pieces. "Get him, you idiots!" Harper shrieked. Her composure was gone, replaced by frantic rage. "Don't let them get out!" I swung the cane again blindly behind me to create space. I felt it connect with ribs. The second guard grunted and stepped back for a split second. That second was all I needed. "Go, go, go!" I yelled, grabbing Bernice's hand. We scrambled over the broken glass. My shoulder was throbbing like it was on fire, but I ignored it. We bolted out of the dining room into the hallway. Dante was still standing at the table, frozen in shock, watching the violence erupt in his elegant home. He didn't move to help us, but he didn't move to stop us either. He was a statue of cowardice. We ran down the hallway. My lungs were burning. My legs felt heavy as lead. Behind us, I could hear the heavy boots of the second guard giving chase and Harper screaming orders. "Where are we going?" Bernice cried, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The front door is locked, Ike. Not the front door," I panted. The study. The study was 20 feet away. It was the only room on this floor with a solid oak door and a heavy-duty deadbolt. I had installed it myself years ago, insisting on privacy for Dante's business. I never thought I would be using it as a panic room. We threw ourselves at the door. I grabbed the handle and shoved it open. We practically fell inside, slipping on the polished wood floor. I scrambled to my feet and slammed the heavy door shut, just as the guard slammed his body against it from the other side. The impact shook the walls. The door shuddered, but it held. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I engaged the secondary lock. Click. A split second later, another heavy thud hit the door. Then a kick. "Open this door!" Harper screamed from the hallway. "Open it now. Ike or I swear to God, I will burn this house down with you inside." I backed away from the door, my chest heaving, fighting for air. Bernice collapsed into the leather armchair, weeping silently, her hands covering her face. We were trapped. We were cornered, but we were alive. I looked around the study. The Project Omega folder was still on the desk where I had left it, the evidence of their betrayal. I looked at the door again as another kick shook the frame. The wood groaned, but the hinges held. Good American oak, solid steel bolts. It would buy us time, but not much. I limped over to the desk, leaning heavily on my cane. My adrenaline was fading, and the pain was rushing back in a tidal wave. I looked at my wife. She looked small and terrified. I realized then that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a war. And we were losing. I needed a weapon. I needed help. And looking at the barred windows and the disconnected phone lines, I realized we were completely alone. Or so I thought. My eyes fell on the old decorative fireplace in the corner. Above it, mounted on the wall, were two antique flintlock pistols. Replicas, useless. But below them in the display case was something else. A flare gun. A remnant from my boating days that Dante had kept as a souvenir. I grabbed it. I broke the barrel open. It was empty. My heart sank. Then I saw the box of shells on the bookshelf next to it, dust-covered. Forgotten. I grabbed the box. My hands shook as I pulled out a red shell. Harper was screaming outside the door, threatening to call more men. I loaded the flare gun. I looked at Bernice. "They want a tragedy," I whispered, gripping the orange handle of the gun. "They want an accident." I walked to the window. "Let's give them a fireworks show instead." The oak door behind us groaned under another massive impact. Boom! Dust drifted down from the door frame, coating the polished floorboards. It was a solid door, American white oak 2 inches thick, installed by my own crew 10 years ago. But even the best wood yields to brute force eventually. Behind that door, Harper was screaming orders, and her hired thugs were taking turns, throwing their shoulders against the timber. They were trying to break the lock, but they were also trying to break our spirits. "Ike, what do we do?" Bernice whispered. She was huddled in the corner by the heavy velvet drapes, holding a brass letter opener like a dagger. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the hinges that were starting to buckle with every blow. I didn't look at the door. I looked at the room. This was my son's sanctuary, or at least the sanctuary I had built for him. Dante never really used this room. He preferred his gaming chair and his monitors. This room, with its leather-bound books and smell of cedar, was just a set piece, a prop for the successful businessman he pretended to be. My eyes landed on the wet bar in the corner, specifically on the wood paneling beneath the granite counter. 5 years ago, when the house was finished, I had installed a wall safe there, a hidden compartment for emergency cash or documents. I gave Dante the code. I told him to change it immediately. Knowing my son, he probably never touched it. I limped over to the bar, leaning heavily on my cane. My shoulder was throbbing, a dull, deep ache that reminded me I was 72, not 22. I fell to my knees in front of the panel. I ran my fingers along the molding until I felt the hidden catch. I pressed it. A small section of the wood popped open, revealing a digital keypad. "Please haven't changed it," I muttered. "Please be as lazy as I think you are." I typed in the code. 0824. My birthday. The keypad beeped. A small green light flashed in the darkness. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I pulled the handle and the heavy steel door swung open. It wasn't empty. Inside lay a snub-nose .38 special revolver. It was old. The bluing was worn off the barrel. It was a gun I had given Dante for home protection years ago. It sat there cold and lethal on the metal shelf. Next to the gun was a thick manila envelope. I reached for the gun first, checking the cylinder. It was fully loaded. 6 rounds of hollow-point ammunition. "Ike, use it," Bernice hissed from the corner. "Shoot through the door, scare them away." I looked at the gun. It felt heavy in my hand. Familiar. But I shook my head. "I am not a killer, Bernice," I said. "And if I fire this gun through the door, I might hit Dante. He is out there too. I am not going to kill my son to save myself." I put the gun down on the carpet and picked up the envelope. It wasn't sealed. I pulled out the documents inside. I expected to find cash. Or maybe old tax returns. What I found made me want to burn the house down with my bare hands. It was a legal petition. A petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers. I scanned the pages. The petitioner was Harper Thornton. The respondent was Dante Thornton. The date on the signature line was next Tuesday. My hands shook. She had this planned down to the hour. Kill me on Saturday, cremate me on Sunday, cash the insurance check on Monday, and serve Dante with divorce papers on Tuesday. She wasn't just using him. She was discarding him. Once she had the money, she was going to kick him out on the street. She had already listed the grounds for divorce: adultery, gambling addiction, financial instability. She was going to take the house, the money, and the reputation, and leave my son with nothing but guilt and a prison sentence if the truth ever came out. "This woman is the devil," I whispered. I looked up at Bernice. She had crept closer and was reading over my shoulder. She gasped. "She never loved him," Bernice said, tears streaming down her face. "She hates him." The door behind us gave a loud crack. The top hinge had pulled away from the frame. We could see splinters of wood flying. We had maybe 2 minutes before they were inside. "We need a way out," Bernice said, gripping my arm. "The window, Ike! Break the window!" I looked at the window. It was a floor-to-ceiling masterpiece overlooking the cliffs, but it was reinforced hurricane-proof glass. And worse, it was secured by Harper's new security system. Heavy steel shutters had rolled down halfway, locking into the frame with magnetic bolts. I tried the manual release on the wall. Dead. The power cut had disabled it. "We can't break it," I said, "and we can't lift it. Those magnetic locks can hold 5,000 pounds of pressure." "Then use the gun," Bernice pleaded. "Shoot the lock." I looked at the gun again. Shooting a hardened steel magnetic lock with a .38 special would just result in a ricochet. It wouldn't break the circuit. But then I looked at the bullets in the cylinder. "I don't need the bullet," I said, my mind racing back to a demolition course I took in the Army 50 years ago. "I need the powder." I grabbed the gun and dumped the bullets onto the carpet. I grabbed my pocket knife. "Ike, what are you doing?" Bernice cried. "They are almost through. Hold this," I ordered, handing her the flashlight she had found on the desk. "Shine it on the lock mechanism." I crawled to the window. The magnetic lock was a small box housing at the base of the frame. If I could destroy the internal mechanism, the failsafe would release the shutters. I took one of the bullets. I jammed the blade of my knife into the seam where the lead slug met the brass casing. I twisted. It was hard work, but the lead gave way. I popped the bullet head off. Inside the casing was the gray granular gunpowder. I poured the powder carefully into the keyhole of the locking mechanism. I did it again with a second bullet, and a third. I packed the lock full of explosive powder. "Ike, the door!" Bernice screamed. I looked back. A hand was reaching through the gap in the door, trying to undo the deadbolt. It was the guard with the scar. I grabbed a piece of heavy fabric from the curtain tie-back. I twisted it tight and shoved it into the hole with the gunpowder, leaving a small tail hanging out. A primitive fuse. "Get back behind the desk," I yelled at Bernice. "Cover your ears and open your mouth. It equalizes the pressure." I pulled a book of matches from my pocket. I struck one. The flame flared up, illuminating the fear on my wife's face. I touched the flame to the fabric fuse. It caught instantly. I dove behind the heavy mahogany desk just as the fuse burned down into the lock. There was a sharp, deafening crack. Not like a gunshot, more like a thunderclap in a bottle. Smoke billowed out from the window frame. For a second, nothing happened. Then came the sound of metal grinding on metal. The explosion had shattered the locking pin. The failsafe disengaged. The heavy steel shutters rolled up with a groan, exposing the stormy night outside. I stood up, coughing through the smoke. The window was open. The rain was lashing in. The door behind us finally gave way with a crash. The guards stumbled into the room, ready to kill. But they were too late. I grabbed Bernice's hand. Out, I yelled, into the storm. We climbed over the sill and dropped onto the wet, muddy grass of the backyard just as a gunshot rang out from the study, shattering the glass above our heads. We were out of the fortress, but now we were in the jungle, and the hunt was on. The wood of the library door was screaming. That is the only way to describe it. Under the relentless assault of the two hired thugs, the solid American oak was splintering and groaning like a living thing in pain. Every impact sent a vibration through the floorboards that I could feel in the soles of my feet. I crouched behind the heavy mahogany desk, shielding Bernice with my body, watching the fuse I had improvised burn down toward the gunpowder-packed lock. The flame was small and blue, hissing spitefully as it ate through the twisted fabric. It was the only light in the room aside from the occasional flash of lightning from the storm raging outside the shuttered window. "Ike, they are coming," Bernice whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding on the door. She was trembling so violently that the heavy desk rattled against my back. I kept my eyes on the fuse. 3 inches left. 2 inches. Suddenly the pounding stopped. For a second the silence was more terrifying than the noise. Then I heard a voice. It was my son. "Harper, stop it!" Dante screamed from the hallway. His voice was raw, hysterical. "You can't do this. They are my parents." I froze. I signaled Bernice to stay down. I crept closer to the door, my ear pressed against the wood. "Get out of the way," Dante Harper hissed. Her voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the voice of the woman who had married my son. It was the voice of a cornered animal. "No," Dante shouted. I heard the sound of a scuffle, someone being shoved against the wall. "You lied to me, Harper. You showed me fake medical records. You told me he was dying. You told me this was mercy. This isn't mercy. This is murder." I closed my eyes. My boy. He had finally woken up. It took a gun and a locked door, but he had finally found his spine. "Move," Dante Harper warned. Her voice was low, deadly quiet. "I have come too far to let your sudden conscience ruin me. We are $3 million in debt. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want to go to jail?" "I don't care about the house," Dante yelled. "I am calling the police. I am ending this right and now." I heard the distinct sound of movement. Dante lunging for something. Maybe her phone. Maybe the door handle. Then I heard it. The sound that changes everything. Bang. It was deafening in the enclosed hallway. A single gunshot. Loud, final. I stopped breathing. Bernice let out a strangled cry, her hands flying to her mouth. Outside the door there was a heavy thud. The sound of a body hitting the floor. Dante Harper screamed, but there was no regret in her voice, only frustration. "Look what you made me do." Then I heard a low moan. He was alive. Thank God Almighty he was alive. My shoulder, Dante gasped, his voice wet with pain. "You shot me. You actually shot me." "Get him out of here," Harper barked at the guards. "Drag him to the kitchen. Tie him up. If he bleeds out, that is his problem. I will deal with the old man myself." I felt a cold rage wash over me. A rage so pure it cleared my vision and steadied my hands. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was a war zone. Harper had crossed the line from manipulator to killer. She had shot her own husband to get to us. I looked at the fuse. It was burned down to the nub. "Cover your ears!" I yelled at Bernice, throwing myself on top of her. The gunpowder inside the lock ignited. Crack. It wasn't a huge explosion. It was a sharp, concussive snap, like a hammer hitting an anvil. Smoke billowed out from the window frame, smelling of sulfur and burnt metal. I scrambled up, coughing. The magnetic locking mechanism was smoking, ruined by the small charge. The safety latches disengaged with a metallic groan. The heavy steel shutters began to rise slowly, revealing the night outside. The wind hit us instantly. It was a nor'easter, a violent storm blowing in off the Atlantic. Rain lashed into the room sideways, soaking the expensive rugs and stinging my face like buckshot. The door behind us shook again. This time a massive kick split the wood right down the center. Through the crack, I saw the face of the scarred guard. He was smiling. "They are in here," he shouted. "We have to go." "Bernice," I screamed, grabbing her hand. "The window, now!" "But the drop," she cried, looking at the dark, wet ledge. "It is 20 feet down." "We aren't jumping," I said, pulling her toward the opening. "The trellis. We are climbing." I helped her over the sill. The wind almost knocked her back inside. Her dress was instantly soaked, clinging to her frail frame. She was 70 years old, a retired nurse, not a stunt woman, but terror is a powerful motivator. She grabbed the thick iron ivy trellis that ran down the side of the house. "Go," I shouted, pushing her gently. "Don't look down. Just find the footholds." She started to climb down, disappearing into the driving rain. I swung my leg over the sill just as the library door exploded inward. The guard burst into the room, gun drawn. "Hey!" he yelled, raising the weapon. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the desk and threw it with everything I had left. It wasn't a great throw, but it was enough to make him duck. I slipped out the window into the storm. The ledge was narrow, barely 6 inches of slippery stone. The wind howled, tearing at my clothes, trying to peel me off the wall. Below me only darkness and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs. I found the trellis. The iron was cold and slick with rain. My arthritis screamed as I gripped the bars. My shoulder, the one the guard had punched, throbbed in agony. I looked up. The guard was at the window, leaning out. He aimed the gun. But the storm was on my side. A massive gust of wind and rain hit him full in the face, blinding him for a second. I slid down the trellis, scraping my knuckles raw against the stone facade. Below me, Bernice had reached the muddy ground. She was looking up, her face pale in the flash of lightning. I dropped the last 5 feet, landing hard in the mud. My bad knee buckled, and I went down, biting my tongue to keep from screaming. Ike Bernice was beside me, instantly trying to pull me up. "Are you hit?" I spit blood into the mud. "No, just old." We heard shouting from above. Flashlight beams cut through the rain, searching the yard. "They are outside." Harper's voice shrieked over the wind. "Release the dogs." My blood ran cold. The Dobermans. Harper had 2 of them, trained attack dogs she kept in the kennels behind the garage. "We can't outrun dogs," Bernice sobbed, pulling at my arm. "We don't have to outrun them," I said, forcing myself to stand, wiping the mud from my eyes. "We just have to make it to the woods." I pointed to the dark tree line 50 yards away, the dense forest that surrounded the estate. Into the trees, I commanded, "Move, Bernice. Move like your life depends on it, because it does." We ran, 2 old people slipping and sliding in the mud, holding hands, while the thunder cracked overhead and the baying of hounds erupted behind us. We weren't the prey anymore. We were the survivors, and we were heading into the darkness to fight back. The forest was not a sanctuary. It was a mouth waiting to swallow us whole. The storm had turned the ground into a slurry of freezing mud and rotting leaves that sucked at our shoes with every step. I was holding Bernice's hand so tight I thought I might break her fingers, but I couldn't let go. If we separated in this darkness, we would never find each other again. The rain was coming down in sheets, washing away the world, reducing our visibility to barely a few feet. It was cold, a bone-deep cold that pierced through our soaked formal wear and settled in our chests. We had barely made it 50 yards into the tree line when the sound erupted behind us. It wasn't the sound of thunder. It was worse. It was the guttural, rhythmic barking of dogs who had caught a scent. Harper had done it. She had released Zeus and Apollo, 2 purebred Dobermans she claimed were for personal protection. I had seen them tear a delivery truck tire to shreds for fun. Now they were hunting us. "Move, Bernice," I whispered, pulling her forward. "Keep moving." "Ike, I can't," she gasped. Her chest was heaving. Her dress was heavy with mud, dragging her down like an anchor. My legs. I didn't answer. I didn't have the breath to spare. My mind was racing back 50 years. Back to a different jungle and a different war. The vegetation was different, but the feeling was exactly the same. The prickly heat of being hunted, the instinct to freeze, the knowledge that movement meant life. I stopped looking at the ground and started looking at the terrain. We were on a slope. Water flows downhill. "To the creek," I said. "We have to get to the water." "Why?" Bernice cried as a branch whipped across her face, leaving a red welt. "The dogs," I said, pushing through a thicket of thorns that tore at my tuxedo jacket. "They track by scent. The rain helps us, but the water will hide us. If we cross the creek, we break the trail." We stumbled down the embankment. Behind us through the trees I could see beams of light slicing through the rain. Flashlights. The guards were coming. They were moving in a sweep formation, feigning out. They knew what they were doing. These weren't just hired thugs. They were professionals. And the barking was getting louder. Closer. "Ike, look out," Bernice screamed. I spun around. But it wasn't a dog, it was the ground. Bernice's foot had caught on a hidden root. She went down hard. There was a sickening snap and a cry of pain that was immediately swallowed by the wind. Bernice. I fell to my knees beside her in the mud. She was clutching her right ankle. Her face was pale white in the darkness, her eyes squeezed shut in agony. "It is broken," she sobbed. I felt it pop. "Ike, I can't walk. You have to go." I looked at the flashlights. They were maybe 100 yards away, bobbing up and down. "Don't you dare say that," I growled. I grabbed her arm. "I am not leaving you. I didn't leave you when we were broke. I didn't leave you when we lost the first baby. And I am not leaving you for 2 dogs and a witch in a pantsuit." I pulled her up. She cried out, but she bit her lip until it bled to keep quiet. "Lean on me," I said, wrapping my arm around her waist. I took her weight. My own bad knee screamed in protest, sending spikes of fire up my leg. But pain is just information. And right now the information was that we were alive. We hobbled forward. The creek was just ahead. It was swollen with rain rushing over jagged rocks. Into the water I ordered. It was freezing. Ice-cold shock that stole the breath from our lungs. The water swirled around our waists, pulling at us, trying to knock us over. We waded downstream, moving with the current. It was slow, agonizing work. Every step was a gamble on slippery rocks. Above us on the bank, the dog barking reached the spot where we had entered the water. I heard confused yelping. They had lost the scent. "Keep going," I whispered. "Just a little further." I saw a shape in the darkness ahead, a structure. It wasn't the main house. It was the old gardener's shed, a dilapidated wooden shack that Dante had been meaning to tear down for years. It was overgrown with ivy and half collapsing, but it had walls and a roof. We dragged ourselves out of the creek and up the muddy bank. I kicked the rotting door open. It swung on one hinge. We collapsed inside onto the dirt floor. It smelled of mold and gasoline and dead leaves, but it was dry, or at least drier than the forest. I pushed the door shut and wedged a rusted shovel blade against it. It wouldn't stop a determined man, but it would stop a dog. "Ike," Bernice whispered. Her voice was weak. She was shivering violently. Hypothermia was setting in. I crawled over to her in the dark. I fumbled in my pocket for my lighter. It was wet. I flicked it once, twice, nothing. On the third try, a small flame sputtered to life. I looked at Bernice. She was a mess. Mud in her silver hair, her dress torn, her lips blue. I looked at her ankle. It was swollen to the size of a grapefruit, threatening to burst out of her shoe. "We need to get that shoe off," I said. "If it swells anymore, we will have to cut it off." I put the lighter on a dusty workbench, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I took off my tuxedo jacket. It was ruined anyway. I gripped the sleeve of my white dress shirt, the shirt I had worn to look dignified for my son. I ripped the sleeve off. The sound of tearing fabric was loud in the small space. I ripped the other sleeve, then the back panel. I knelt at Bernice's feet. "This is going to hurt," I said, looking into her eyes. "Do it," she said through chattering teeth. I unbuckled the shoe and slid it off. She gasped, tears leaking from her eyes. I wrapped the makeshift bandages around her ankle, pulling them tight to immobilize the joint. She gripped my shoulder, her nails digging into my skin. She didn't scream. She was the toughest woman I had ever known. "There," I said, tying the knot. "That is the best I can do." I sat back against the wall, pulling her into my arms to share body heat. We sat there in the dark, listening to the storm pounding on the tin roof, listening to the distant barking of the dogs fading into the west woods. They had gone the wrong way. Ike, Bernice whispered, burying her face in my chest. "Why? Why did he do it? I loved him so much. I gave him everything." I stroked her wet hair. My heart felt like a stone in my chest, heavy, cold. "Because he is weak, Bernice," I said softly. "And because we let him be weak. We protected him from the world, and he never learned how to stand in it. So when a predator like Harper came along, he didn't fight back. He just rolled over." I felt Bernice stiffen. She pulled back and looked at me. In the dim light of the dying lighter flame, I saw something change in her eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by something harder, something ancient. "He is not our son anymore," she said. Her voice was steady. "Not tonight. Not. Tonight he is just an accomplice." I nodded slowly. The sadness was still there, but the soldier in me was taking over. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a commander whose perimeter had been breached. "We are going to survive this, Bernice," I said. "We are going to wait here until the sun comes up or until help arrives." "And then?" Bernice asked. I looked at the rusted tools hanging on the wall, a scythe, a hammer. They were old and neglected just like us, but in the right hands, they were still dangerous. And then I said, my voice dropping to a low growl, "I am going to teach Harper a lesson about the food chain. She thinks we are the prey because we are old. She thinks we are weak because we are kind." I picked up a heavy iron wrench from the floor. I weighed it in my hand. "She is about to find out that the oldest wolves are the ones who know how to hunt in the dark." Bernice nodded. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was strong. "Let's rest, Ike," she said. "We have a war to win in the morning." I blew out the lighter, plunging us back into darkness. But it wasn't the terrifying darkness of the forest anymore. It was the tactical darkness of an ambush. We weren't running anymore. We were waiting. And God help anyone who opened that door. The shed smelled like a tomb. It was a mix of gasoline and wet rot and the metallic tang of old rust. I fumbled in the dark, my hands brushing against cobwebs and sharp edges. Bernice was huddled in the corner, wrapped in a moldy canvas tarp I had pulled off a lawnmower. Her teeth were chattering so loud I was afraid the guards would hear it over the storm. I needed heat, I needed light, but mostly I needed a way to reach the outside world. My hand struck something cold and metal under the workbench, a generator. I ran my fingers over the casing. It was a Honda unit from the 90s, solid, reliable, the kind we used to use in field hospitals. Next to it sat a dusty gray box with dials, a shortwave radio. Dante had gone through a phase years ago where he wanted to be a survivalist. He bought all the gear, played with it for a week, and then dumped it in this shed to rot. For once, my son's short attention span might actually save our lives. I pulled the radio onto the bench. I flicked the switch. Nothing. The battery pack was dead, corroded by years of humidity. I looked at the generator. It had a 12-volt starter battery. I pulled out my pocket knife. The blade was dull and sticky with tree sap, but it would have to do. I cut the power cord from an old lamp. I stripped the wires, exposing the copper. "Ike, what are you doing?" Bernice whispered, her voice trembling. "I am building a lifeline," I said. Suddenly I froze. Voices. They were close, right outside the thin wooden walls of the shed. I crouched down, pulling Bernice into the shadows. Through the gaps in the rotting wood, I saw the sweep of flashlight beams cutting through the rain. "I don't see tracks," one guard grumbled. "The rain washed everything away." "They are old," the second guard replied. "They can't have gone far. Besides, where are they going to run?" "To the road," the first guard said. "Maybe they flag down a car. Or call the cops." The second guard laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. "Let them call." Harper paid Sheriff Miller $50,000 cash this morning. He has orders to ignore any distress calls from this property tonight. He thinks it is just a family dispute involving a senile old man. If the cops come, they are coming to help us, not them. I felt a cold pit open in my stomach. The sheriff. The law. Harper had bought them all. There was no cavalry coming. We were completely cut off. The footsteps faded away toward the creek. I looked at the radio. If I couldn't call the police, I had to call someone else. Someone who didn't care about money or jurisdiction. I went back to work. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the cold. I worked the copper wires around the terminals of the generator battery. I connected them to the radio power input. I took a deep breath and flipped the switch again. Static. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. A hiss of white noise filling the small shed. I grabbed the microphone. It felt heavy in my hand. I didn't tune to the emergency frequency. The sheriff would be monitoring that. I spun the dial to a frequency that wasn't listed in any civilian manual. 14.2 megahertz. It was a channel used by private contractors, by men who used to be soldiers. Men like Elijah. Elijah was a man I had pulled out of a burning Humvee in Kuwait 30 years ago. He ran a private security firm in New York now. He owed me a life, and tonight I was calling in the debt. I pressed the transmit button. Breaker 19, I said, my voice low and steady. This is Iron Horse, broadcasting on secure channel. Static, then silence. I waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Iron Horse. This is Ghost Dog. A voice crackled through the speaker. It was deep and gravelly. You are on a restricted frequency. Identify. I didn't waste time. Get me the prophet, I said. Tell him Iron Horse is down. Tell him the perimeter is breached. There was a pause. Then a new voice cut through the static. Clearer, sharper. Ike, is that you? Elijah. Elijah, I said. I am at my son's estate in the Hamptons. My life is in danger. Hostiles on site. They are armed, and they have bought the local law. Jesus, Ike Elijah breathed. What do you need? I looked at Bernice. She was watching me, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. I took a breath. I gave him the code we had agreed on years ago over whiskey and poker, a code for the worst-case scenario. Broken Falcon, I said. Coordinates 40 north 72 west. I paused, gripping the microphone until my knuckles turned white. Bring Hunters Elijah, not extraction, Hunters. The line went dead for a second. Then Elijah's voice came back cold as ice and hard as steel. Broken Falcon confirmed. We are 20 minutes out. Keep your head down, Ike. We are bringing the rain. I clicked the radio off. I disconnected the wires. I crawled back to Bernice and wrapped my arms around her. Who was that? She asked, shivering against my chest. That was the only justice left in this world, I whispered. We just have to survive 20 minutes. And then the hunters become the hunted. The rain hammered against the tin roof of the shed like 1,000 tiny hammers trying to break in. Inside, the darkness was thick and heavy, smelling of ozone and wet earth. I knelt in the mud, my hands working by feel alone. Harper thought we were huddled in a corner praying for mercy. She thought we were two frightened old people waiting to die. She was wrong. We were not waiting. We were preparing. I could hear her voice drifting from the tree line carried by the wind. She sounded annoyed, not worried. She was shouting at her men, telling them to check the perimeter, telling them to sweep the creek. She called us geriatric baggage. She said we probably collapsed from hypothermia a mile back. That arrogance was her weakness. She assumed that because my hair was gray, my mind was soft. She forgot that before I was a CEO in a suit, I was a combat engineer in boots. And an engineer knows that with enough leverage and the right materials, you can bring down anything, even a monster. Ike, they are getting closer, Bernice whispered. She was holding the stripped wires of the generator, her hands trembling but her grip firm. She was in pain, her ankle throbbing with every heartbeat, but she didn't complain. She was holding the line. Good, I said, twisting the copper wire around a rusted iron rake I had found in the corner. Let them come. I had turned the shed into a kill box. It was a crude setup born of desperation and garbage, but it was lethal. I had taken the live feed from the generator, the one I had just fixed, and stripped the insulation. I ran the positive lead to the metal handle of the rake, which I buried tines up in the mud right inside the doorway. I ran the negative lead to a puddle of water that had leaked under the doorframe. It was a simple circuit. A trap designed to deliver a 12-volt shock at high amperage. It wouldn't kill a man instantly, but it would drop him like a sack of cement. I looked around for more. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, picking out shapes. A loose floorboard with a nail sticking up. A heavy bag of potting soil on a high shelf. I moved with a purpose, ignoring the screaming in my knees. I loosened the floorboard, balancing it on a stone so it would flip up if stepped on. I tied a piece of fishing line to the potting soil and strung it across the entryway at ankle height. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't up to code. It was ugly and dangerous and perfect. Flashlight beams slashed through the gaps in the rotting wood walls. They were right outside. I smell smoke. One guard grunted. His voice was close. Too close. Probably just the old man trying to stay warm. The second guard laughed. Kick the door in. Let's get this over with. Harper wants them back at the house before the coroner arrives. I looked at Bernice. I put a finger to my lips. I pointed to the back corner behind the workbench. She nodded and dragged herself into the shadows, clutching a heavy pipe wrench I had given her. I crouched behind the generator, my hand hovering over the throttle. Ready, I whispered to myself. The door exploded inward. A heavy boot kicked the rotting wood, shattering the lock I had improvised. The first guard stepped in. He was big, wearing a raincoat that shone in the flashlight beam. He held a baton in one hand and a taser in the other. Come out, wherever you are," he taunted, stepping into the darkness. He didn't see the fishing line. His boot caught the tripwire. He stumbled forward, his arms flailing. "Now!" I yanked the throttle on the generator. The engine roared to life, coughing smoke and power. The guard instinctively reached out to break his fall. His hand slammed down onto the metal rake handle buried in the mud. The circuit closed. The effect was instantaneous. The generator surged. The guard's body went rigid. He didn't scream. His teeth clamped shut so hard I heard them crack. He convulsed violently, the electricity locking his muscles, seizing his nervous system. He shook for 3 seconds that felt like an hour, and then he collapsed face down in the mud smoke rising from his glove. The second guard, who was standing just outside the door, froze. He saw his partner drop. He saw the sparks fly. He hesitated. That hesitation cost him. I lunged from behind the generator. I didn't have a weapon. I was the weapon. I slammed my shoulder into the doorframe, knocking a heavy rusted scythe off the wall. It clattered down, falling across the doorway. The second guard shined his light on me. He saw a 72-year-old man covered in mud, eyes burning with a cold fury. He reached for his gun, but he was standing in the puddle. The puddle connected to the negative lead. I kicked the live wire into the water. The guard yelled a short, sharp sound of shock as the current bit him through his wet boots. He fired a shot wildly into the air and stumbled back, slipping in the mud, falling hard on his back. He scrambled away, crab-walking through the slush, terrified of the electrified shack. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. I had what I wanted. I walked over to the first guard, who was groaning face down in the dirt. He was alive, but he wouldn't be walking anytime soon. I reached down and unclipped the radio from his belt. It was a high-end tactical model, heavy and rugged. I checked the channel. It was set to the main frequency, Harper's frequency. I held the radio up. My hand was steady. The adrenaline had burned away the fear, leaving only a cold, crystalline focus. I pressed the transmit button. "Harper," I said. My voice was low, rasping with smoke and rain. There was a pause. Then Harper's voice came back sharp and angry. "Report. Did you find them? Is it done?" I looked at Bernice. She was watching me from the shadows, the pipe wrench still in her hand. She looked fierce. She looked like a queen of the underworld. I brought the radio closer to my mouth. "Your man is down, Harper." He stepped on a rake. It was a shocking experience. Silence on the other end. Then a ragged breath. "Ike." "Yeah, it is Ike," I said. "But not the Ike you know. Not the nice old man who signs checks and looks the other way. That man died in the woods tonight." I walked to the door, looking out at the rain-swept forest. The storm was raging, but inside me it was calm. "You made a mistake, Harper," I continued. "You thought you were hunting sheep. You thought because we are old we are weak. You forgot who built this house. You forgot who built the roads you drive on. You forgot that I fought in a war before your mother was even born. Ike, listen to me." Harper's voice was shaking now, trying to regain control. "We can make a deal. Just come back. We can talk about the money." I laughed. It was a dark sound. "There is no deal, Harper. And there is no money. I am not running anymore. I am done hiding in the mud." I checked the charge on the radio. "Full battery. I am coming back to the house," I said. "But I am not coming to talk. I am coming to take back what is mine." I released the button. I clipped the radio to my belt. I knelt down and checked the guard's pockets. I found a spare magazine for his gun. I found a knife. I took them both. I stood up and offered my hand to Bernice. "Can you walk?" I asked. She took my hand and pulled herself up, using the wrench as a cane. She winced, but her eyes were dry. "I can walk," she said, "as long as we are walking toward her." I nodded. I kicked the generator off, killing the power. The silence rushed back in, filled only by the sound of the rain. "Let's go," I said. We stepped out of the shed. We weren't fleeing into the darkness anymore. We were stepping into it with a purpose. The prey had become the predator, and the night was about to get a lot longer for the woman in the red dress. The radio on my belt was silent, but the clock in my head was ticking loud enough to deafen me. Elijah and his team of hunters were 20 minutes out. In the world of private security, 20 minutes is a lifetime. In the world of a man bleeding out from a gunshot wound, it is an eternity. I looked at Bernice. She was huddled in the corner of the shed, shivering violently, her face pale as the moon. She gripped my hand with fingers that felt like ice. "Don't go back, Ike," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They will kill you. Wait for Elijah. Wait for the cavalry." I looked down at my wife. I wiped a smudge of mud from her cheek. I wanted to stay. I wanted to sit there and hold her until the nightmare ended. But I couldn't. "I can't wait, Bernice," I said softly. "Dante is bleeding. He is a fool and a coward, and he broke my heart tonight. But he is still the boy I taught to fish. He is still the boy I carried on my shoulders. A father's job doesn't end when his son makes a mistake. It ends when his son is safe." I kissed her forehead. It was a goodbye kiss, but I didn't say the words. "Keep the wrench close," I said. "If anyone opens that door, and it isn't me, swing for the fences." I stepped back out into the storm. The rain had turned into a deluge. The wind was screaming through the trees, tearing branches loose and hurling them like javelins. I didn't head for the front gate. I didn't head for the kitchen door where the guards were waiting. I headed for the old stone retaining wall at the base of the garden. Harper thought she knew this house. She thought she owned it because her name was on the deed and she had picked out the curtains. But she didn't know the bones of the place. She didn't know what lay beneath the foundation. When I built this estate 5 years ago, I included a feature that wasn't on the blueprints filed with the county. I called it a drainage access tunnel. In reality, it was a prohibition-style escape route, a relic of my paranoia or perhaps my intuition. It ran from the retaining wall straight into the back of the wine cellar. I found the loose stone covered in ivy. I pried it open with the knife I had taken from the guard. A dark, damp hole stared back at me. It smelled of wet earth and spiders. I squeezed inside, dragging my bad leg behind me. The tunnel was tight, barely 3 feet wide. I was crawling through the throat of the earth. I moved fast, ignoring the pain in my knees, ignoring the sharp rocks cutting into my palms. I was 72 years old, crawling through the mud to save a son who had tried to kill me. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. I reached the end of the tunnel. A heavy steel panel blocked the way. I found the latch mechanism I had greased 5 years ago. I prayed it hadn't rusted shut. I pushed. It groaned. I pushed harder, channeling every ounce of rage and love I had left. The panel swung inward. I tumbled out onto the cold stone floor of the wine cellar. The air here was cool and smelled of cork and expensive vintage. I was surrounded by racks of wine worth more than my first house. I crouched in the shadows behind a wall of Bordeaux crates, listening. I heard sobbing, a low, wet, pathetic sound that made my stomach turn. "Please, Harper. Please, just call an ambulance." I feel cold. It was Dante. I peeked around the crates. The scene before me was like a painting from hell. Dante was tied to a heavy wooden tasting chair in the center of the room. His tuxedo shirt was soaked in blood on the left side. His face was gray, the color of old ash. He was slumped forward, his head hanging, his breathing shallow and ragged. Harper was there. She wasn't looking at him. She was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger, her heels clicking sharply on the stone floor. She was holding a laptop in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. She took a swig straight from the bottle. "Shut up, Dante," she snapped. "I am trying to think." She slammed the laptop down on the tasting table right in front of him. "The trust fund," she screamed, leaning into his face. "The Cayman account. What is the access code?" "I don't know," Dante wheezed. "My dad never gave it to me. He said I wasn't ready." Liar, Harper shrieked. She grabbed his wounded shoulder and dug her thumb into the bullet hole. Dante screamed. It was a high-pitched sound of pure agony that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. I flinched in the shadows, my hand gripping the knife so tight my knuckles turned white. It took every ounce of discipline I had not to rush out there and cut her throat. But she had a gun tucked into her waistband, and there was a guard standing by the stairs, his back to me. I had to be smart. "Think, Dante," think, Harper hissed, leaning close to his ear. "Your father is dead. He is rotting in the woods. That money is ours now. But I can't access the offshore account without the second numeric key. He must have told you. He told you everything." "He didn't." Dante sobbed, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "He knew. He always knew I was weak. He protected the money from me. Harper, please, I am dying. Good. Harper stepped back, her face twisting into a sneer. Then die. But do it quietly. I have 10 minutes to crack this before I have to start stripping the jewelry off your mother's corpse to make this night worth my time. She turned to the guard. Go upstairs, she ordered. Check on the team in the woods. If they haven't found the old man yet, tell them to burn the forest down. I don't care about the trees. I want bodies. The guard nodded and started up the spiral staircase. I waited until his footsteps faded. Now it was just the three of us. The Father, the Son, and the Devil in the red dress. Harper turned back to the laptop, her fingers flying across the keys, trying password after password. She was manic, desperate. Her greed was consuming her, eating her alive from the inside out. Dante's head lolled back. His eyes were rolling up in his head. He was fading. I couldn't wait for Elijah. I couldn't wait for the perfect moment. I stood up from behind the wine crates. I was covered in mud, bleeding from a dozen cuts, holding a knife that belonged to a man I had electrocuted. I didn't look like a billionaire. I looked like a wraith rising from the grave. I stepped into the light. You are typing the wrong password, Harper. I said, my voice low and steady. Harper spun around. She dropped the whiskey bottle. It shattered on the floor, exploding in a spray of amber liquid and glass. She stared at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. Dad, Dante whispered, "You are alive." I walked toward them. I didn't run. I walked with the heavy, inevitable gait of Judgment Day. Harper fumbled for the gun in her waistband. Her hands were slippery with sweat and whiskey. "I wouldn't do that," I said. She pulled the gun out. She leveled it at my chest. Her hand was shaking violently. "Stay back," she screamed. "Stay back, or I will finish what I started." I didn't stop. I kept walking. "You can't finish anything." "Harper," I said, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "You don't have the code. You don't have the money. And in about 15 minutes, you aren't going to have your freedom." I stopped 5 feet from her. The barrel of the gun was wavering, pointing at my heart, then my head, then my heart again. "Shoot me," I challenged her. "Go ahead. Pull the trigger. But know this. The moment you do the biometric lock on that trust fund seals permanently. My death triggers a scorched earth protocol. The money goes to charity, every single dime. You get nothing." Harper froze. Greed warred with fear in her eyes. She lowered the gun an inch. "You are lying," she whispered. "Try me," I said. I looked at Dante. He was looking at me with a mixture of awe and shame. "I am sorry, Dad," he mouthed silent words that broke my heart. I looked back at Harper. "Put the gun down, Harper. It is over. The police aren't coming, but my friends are, and they don't carry handcuffs. They carry body bags." Harper let out a hysterical laugh. She backed up until she hit the table. She looked at the laptop, then at me, then at the gun. "No," she hissed. "I came too far. I did too much. I am not leaving here poor." She raised the gun again, steadying it with both hands. Her eyes went dead. She had made her choice. She chose the abyss. "Say goodbye, Ike," she said. But before she could squeeze the trigger, a red dot appeared on her forehead, then another on her chest. Through the high basement window behind her, through the storm and the rain, the hunters had arrived. The air in the wine cellar was heavy with the smell of spilled whiskey and fear. I stepped out from behind the crates and into the harsh light of the halogen bulb hanging above the tasting table. I was covered in mud from head to toe. My tuxedo was shredded. My face was bleeding from a dozen cuts where the forest had tried to stop me. I must have looked like a monster rising from the grave, but I didn't feel like a monster. I felt like a judge. Harper spun around so fast she almost lost her balance. She gripped the gun with both hands, leveling it at my chest. Her eyes were wild, bloodshot, and manic. She looked at me, and then at the laptop, and then back at me. Her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. I was supposed to be dead in the woods. I was supposed to be a tragic accident. "Stay back," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Stay back, or I swear I will put a bullet in your heart." I didn't stop. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. My cane tapped against the stone floor. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed like a countdown. "You can't kill a ghost, Harper," I said, my voice low and rough. "And as far as you are concerned, I died the moment you poisoned that wine." She backed up until her hips hit the heavy oak table where Dante was slumped. She was cornered. A cornered animal is dangerous, but a cornered animal is also stupid. "Just give me the code," she shrieked, waving the gun. "I know there is a secondary password for the offshore accounts. Give it to me. Give it to me, and I will let you live. I will let you both live." I stopped 10 feet away from her. I leaned on my cane and looked her up and down. I looked at the red dress that cost more than my father made in a year. I looked at the diamond earrings that belonged to my wife, and I looked at the gun that she was too terrified to aim properly. "You really don't get it, do you?" I said, shaking my head. "You think this is about passwords. You think this is about bank transfers. It is about $5 million, Harper yelled. "It is about my life. I am not going back to being nobody. I am not going back to coupons and rental apartments. Sign the transfer authorization, Ike. Sign it or I kill your son right in front of you." She pointed the gun at Dante's head. Dante groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at me with a mixture of shame and agony. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless laugh that made Harper pause. "What is so funny?" she hissed. "You are," I said. "You think I got rich by building houses, Harper? You think I built an empire just by pouring concrete and stacking bricks? No. Any fool can build a house. I got rich because I know how to manage risk. I spent 40 years anticipating disasters before they happened. Did you really think I didn't see you coming?" Harper's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my torn jacket pocket. Harper flinched, tightening her finger on the trigger, but I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It wasn't the divorce papers. It was a receipt. 3 days ago, I said, holding up the paper, "I noticed you were asking a lot of questions about my estate planning. You were too eager, too helpful. And then I saw the way you looked at Dante when he lost that money. It wasn't love, it was calculation. So I made a call to my lawyer." Harper stared at the paper. "What did you do?" "I initiated what we call a scorched earth protocol," I said, taking another step forward. "I transferred every single asset I own, my company shares, my real estate holdings, my cash reserves. Everything was moved into an irrevocable blind trust 72 hours ago." Harper's face went pale. "No," she whispered, "that is illegal. You can't move assets without spousal consent. I can when the assets are in my name," I said. "And here is the best part, Harper. The trust has a very specific trigger clause. In the event of my death, whether it is natural or accidental or mysterious, the entire trust liquidates immediately. So the money goes to Dante." Harper said, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "It goes to your next of kin." I smiled, and that smile was the cruelest thing I had ever done. "No," I said. "I knew Dante was compromised. I knew you had your claws in him. So I changed the beneficiary. I took another step. If I die tonight, Harper, if you pull that trigger, $5 million doesn't go to you. It doesn't go to Dante. It goes to the National Dog Rescue Foundation." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the dripping of the rain from my clothes. Harper lowered the gun slightly. Her mouth hung open. What she whispered. "You told Bernice you needed pills for a sick dog," I said. "You used a non-existent animal as an excuse to buy the poison meant for me. I thought it was poetic justice. If I die, my fortune goes to save thousands of stray dogs. And you get absolutely nothing. Not a dime, not a house, not even a car. You will be penniless and you will be in prison for murder." No, Harper screamed. It was a sound of pure, primal denial. "You are lying. You are bluffing. No one would do that. No one gives millions to dogs over their own family." "I am not bluffing," I said, my voice hard as steel. "I manage risk, Harper, and I decided that the dogs were a better investment than you." Harper looked at the laptop. She typed frantically, her fingers smashing the keys. She tried to access the main account. Access denied. She tried the backup account. Access denied. Zero balance. She tried the offshore shell company. Account closed. She stared at the screen. The blue light reflected in her eyes, which were now filling with tears of rage. Her entire world, her entire plan, her entire future had just evaporated into thin air. "It is gone," she whispered. "It is all gone." She looked up at me. She looked at the gun in her hand. For a second, I thought she was going to turn it on herself, but her hate was stronger than her despair. She raised the gun again, pointing it straight at my face. Her hand stopped shaking. If I can't have the money, she hissed, then I will just take the satisfaction. I will kill you for free, old man. She pulled back the hammer of the revolver. Click. I didn't move. I didn't close my eyes. I looked her right in the soul. Go ahead, I said. Make the donation. But she never got the chance, because just as her finger tightened on the trigger, a red laser dot appeared on her forehead, then another on her chest, then 3 more dancing across her red dress. The high windows of the wine cellar exploded inward in a shower of glass and rain. Drop it, a voice boomed from the storm outside. The hunters had arrived. The barrel of the .38 special was steady now. Harper had stopped shaking. She had moved past fear and past greed into a place of pure nihilistic rage. She knew she had lost the money. She knew she had lost the house. And in her twisted mind, the only way to balance the ledger was to take the life of the man who had outsmarted her. I watched her finger tighten on the trigger. I saw the muscles in her forearm bunch up. I didn't close my eyes. I didn't look away. I wanted the last thing she saw to be the face of a man who was not afraid of her. Goodbye, Ike, she whispered, her voice trembling with hatred. But the hammer never fell. In the fraction of a second before she could fire, a tiny beam of red light cut through the gloom of the wine cellar. It danced across her red silk dress, traveled up her neck, and settled directly in the center of her forehead. She blinked, confused by the light. Then a second red dot appeared on her chest right over her heart, then a third on her gun hand. She froze. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't the hunter anymore. She was the target. Drop the weapon. The voice didn't come from me. It came from everywhere. It boomed from the high windows behind her, amplified by a megaphone cutting through the sound of the storm. Harper spun around, her eyes wide with terror. The reinforced glass of the basement window shattered inward, not from the wind, but from the boots of men swinging in on ropes. Flashbang grenades rolled across the stone floor. Bang! Bang! Bright white light blinded us. A concussion wave rattled my teeth. When my vision cleared, 3 men in full tactical gear were standing in the room. They moved with the fluid, deadly grace of apex predators. Their assault rifles were raised, and every single barrel was pointed at Harper. Police, one of them shouted, though they weren't police. They were something far more dangerous. Drop the gun, or we will drop you. Harper let out a scream of frustration and threw the revolver across the room. It skittered across the stone floor and spun to a stop at my feet. She fell to her knees, her hands raised in surrender, sobbing hysterically. One of the tactical officers moved in. He kicked her legs out from under her, forcing her flat onto her stomach. He pulled her arms behind her back, and I heard the ratcheting sound of zip ties tightening. The room was suddenly filled with noise, radio chatter, the sound of boots on stone, the howling of the wind through the broken windows. A tall man in black gear stepped through the chaos. He lifted his visor, revealing a face lined with scars and age, but with eyes that were still sharp as flint. Elijah. He walked over to me and clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. I told you we would bring the rain, Ike. He said, his voice a low rumble. You cut it close, old friend, I said, leaning heavily on my cane, my knees finally threatening to give out. About 2 seconds closer and you would have been attending a funeral. Elijah looked at Harper struggling on the floor. He looked at Dante bleeding in the chair. He shook his head. We secured the perimeter, he said. The guards in the woods have been neutralized. Non-lethal takedowns mostly. Your wife is safe. My medic is with her in the shed right now. Bernice. I let out a breath that felt like it had been held for 40 years. Thank God. But Harper wasn't done. She twisted her head up from the floor, spitting hair out of her mouth. You can't do this, she screamed. This is private property. Who are you people? You are trespassing. I will sue you. I will sue all of you. Elijah looked down at her with pure disgust. We are just the cleaning crew, lady, he said. The real law is right behind us. As if on cue, we heard sirens. Not the lone siren of the local sheriff, but a symphony of them. Blue and red lights began to flash through the broken windows, illuminating the rain. State Police, Harper sneered. It doesn't matter. I paid Sheriff Miller. He controls this county. He will fix this. I limped over to her. I looked down at the woman who had tried to destroy my family. Sheriff Miller isn't coming. Harper, I said, and neither is anyone else on your payroll. What are you talking about? She demanded, struggling against the zip ties. I tapped the radio on my belt, the one I had taken from her guard. When I rewired that radio in the shed, I didn't just call Elijah, I said. I patched into his tactical network. For the last 20 minutes, every word you said in this cellar has been transmitted via satellite uplink directly to the New York State Police headquarters in Albany. Harper stopped struggling. Her face went slack. They heard everything, I continued. They heard you admit to the poison. They heard you admit to shooting Dante. They heard you trying to access the offshore accounts. And they heard you threaten to kill me. You didn't just confess to me, Harper. You confessed to the state attorney general. The heavy steel doors of the wine cellar burst open. Uniformed officers poured in. Their patches said New York State Police. These weren't men you could buy with a bribe. These were men who put people like Harper in cages. They hauled her up. She couldn't walk. Her legs had given out under the weight of her failure. Harper Thornton, an officer, read from a card, his voice echoing off the stone walls. You are under arrest for attempted murder in the first-degree kidnapping, wire fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. Harper looked at me one last time as they dragged her away. The arrogance was gone. The greed was gone. All that was left was a terrified child who had played a game she didn't understand and lost everything. She didn't scream, she didn't curse, she just hung her head and let them drag her out into the storm. I turned to Dante. A medic was already cutting his bonds and applying pressure to his shoulder. He was pale, but he was awake. He was looking at the door where his wife had just disappeared. Then he looked at me. Dad. He whispered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the blood. I am so sorry. I walked over to him. I put my hand on his good shoulder. I know, son, I said softly. I know. But as I looked at him, I knew that while I had saved his life, our relationship was another casualty of this night. Some wounds heal, but some betrayals leave scars that never fade. I turned to Elijah. Get me to my wife, I said. I want to go home. And for the first time that night, I let myself feel the pain in my old bones. The war was over. The vultures had been scattered. But the feast had left us all starving for something that money could never buy. Peace. 3 months have passed since the gavel fell, and the silence on our front porch isn't heavy anymore. It is the sound of peace. Bernice sat beside me, her hand resting on my knee, a touch that said, more than 40 years of marriage ever could. I adjusted my glasses and looked down the road toward the new development site about a mile away. Even from this distance, I could see the construction crew moving like ants against the skeleton of a new building. There was one figure in particular I was watching. A man in a neon yellow vest sweating under the unforgiving midday sun, hauling bags of cement one by one. My son, Dante. The prosecutor wanted to give him 5 years. I stood up in that courtroom, my cane trembling against the floor, and told them the truth. I testified that he was coerced, that he was foolish and greedy, yes, but he had been forced into that corner by men far worse than him. The bullet wound in his shoulder was punishment enough for the crime, I argued. But this labor he is doing now, that is the cure for his soul. He called me last week. His voice was cracked, his pride stripped away, asking for a small loan just to get by until payday. For the first time in his life, I said no. I didn't say it out of anger. I said it because I finally understood that my wallet had been his prison. Every dollar I had ever given him was a bar on a cage that kept him from becoming a man. Bernice squeezed my hand, pulling my gaze away from the construction site. You did the right thing, Ike, she whispered, her eyes wet but clear. I nodded, taking a deep breath of the fresh air that smelled of pine and damp earth. I know, I replied softly. I watched Dante wipe his brow, grit his teeth, and lift another heavy bag. Sometimes I told her the greatest act of love is letting them fall so they can finally learn how to stand up on their own. True legacy isn't about the wealth you leave behind, but the values you instill while you're still here. We often blind ourselves to the flaws of those we love, mistaking their greed for need and their manipulation for affection. But a parent's duty isn't just to provide, it is to protect the integrity of the family, even if it means cutting off the very branch you nurtured. Respect is earned, not inherited, and dignity. That is something no amount of money can buy and no betrayal can ever truly take away. Be wise, not just wealthy. If you enjoyed this story and support the lesson Ike had to learn the hard way, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. I want to know what you think. Was Ike right to refuse that final loan to his son? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next story.